establish legal safeguards in addition to parallel efforts underway from the state and local lawmakers. The Federal Aviation Administration said that it will address privacy-related data collection by drones, and we should be okay with that because we can trust our government, right? We can trust the government, and everything they do and say is absolute truth, and there's no reason not to trust them, right? Because the prospect of identifying armed American concerns everyone who cares anything about the Second Amendment. Who says that technology billed as securing the United States and maritime borders should not be used domestically? Well, Michael Kostanek, the Homeland Security official who created the program, told Congress that the drone fleet would be available to respond to emergency missions across the country. As a Predator drone was dispatched to a tiny town of Lakota, North Dakota, to aid police in a dispute that began with reimbursement for feeding sick cows, the defendant, cows. The defendant, arrested with the help of Predator surveillance, lost a primary bid to dismiss the charges. What does that mean? That means they used this Predator drone to track this guy down. And then, when it went to court, he said, man, you can't use Predator drones on American soil to track people down. The court said, yeah, we can. So they just set a precedent. The guy said, I'm very concerned that this technology will be used against law-abiding American firearm owners. That came from Alan Gottlieb, founder and executive vice president of the Second Amendment Foundation. He said this could violate Fourth Amendment rights as well as Second Amendment rights. Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection agencies declined to answer any questions about whether direction-finding technology is currently in use in the drone fleet. Now, a representative provided CNET with a statement about the agency's unmanned aircraft systems that said signal interception capability is not currently used. Well, U.S. Customs and Protection's not deploying signal interception capability on its UAS fleet. They say that any potential deployment of such technology in the future would be implemented in full consideration of civil rights, civil liberties, privacy interests, and a manner consistent with the law and long-standing enforcement practices. And you can just, as sheeple, just swallow everything that they say as being just gospel truth. They say that this UAS program is a vital border security asset, and it's equipped with state-of-the-art sensors and day and night cameras. The UAS provides real-time images for frontline agents to more effectively and efficiently secure the nation's border. As a force multiplier, the UAS operates the extended periods of time and allows the CBP to safely conduct missions over tough-to-reach terrain. Also provides agents on the ground with additional situational awareness to more safely resolve dangerous situations. So they make this sound like it's all nice and good and warm and cuddly and it's going to make us safe, well, except when it comes to using it on us. Now, if this Predator drone was used only to identify smugglers or illegal immigrants crossing the American or Canadian borders, or for disaster relief, they might not be so controversial, but their use domestically by other government agencies is becoming routine. It's expensive enough that Homeland Security Inspector General said last year that it needs to sign agreements for reimbursement of expenses incurred fulfilling mission requests. In other words, all law enforcement or anyone else, FBI, CIA, anybody, make a request to use it, and they grant that request. They say that Homeland Security is developing drones with signal interception technology. Homeland Security officials who did not want to be identified by name said the drones are able to identify whether movement on the ground comes from a human or an animal. They do not perform facial recognition. The official said that because the unarmed drones have a long anticipated lifespan, the department tries to plan ahead for future use to support its border security missions, and the aerial surveillance would comply with the Electronic Communication Privacy Act and federal laws. Okay, if it's going to apply with federal laws, then how does that work out with the NDAA bill that Obama signed? They say if the border area of California and Arizona may be actively dangerous for the law-abiding to not carry firearms precisely due to the illegal flow of drugs and immigrants across the border. They say the system will provide automatic and manual DF and multiple signals simultaneously. Automatic DF should be able to separate an individual's communication links. So it has the ability to even pick up different signals, be able to separate them, tell what form of communication they're using, where they're at, whether or not they're armed. Now, do you think that the federal government is going to restrict that only to the border? Well, go to the website and W. Dean Shook and watch that video of that vehicle, and you tell me that when you combine the capabilities that they're putting on these Predator drones, not the regular little drones that we've been talking about, but on Predator drones, combine that with the police department in paramilitary gear in a paramilitary vehicle that's armor-plated, and tell me that this is for Canadian and Mexican border security. And if you believe that, I have some beachfront property in the Midwest to sell you. You would have to be so incredibly gullible to believe this sack of hooey. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So what kind of power? They say it's going to conform to federal law. What kind of federal law are they conforming to? Let's listen to an honest discussion about this NDAA bill.
And tonight, the vetting of the president continues as we bring you another edition of The Real Obama. Now, in this installment, we shine the spotlight on an executive order that the White House was hoping that you would never learn about. Now, the president signed the National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order late Friday afternoon. And since that time, now the measure has been virtually ignored by the mainstream media. Now, the order essentially gives the president of the United States absolute power over any and all American resources during both times of peace and national crisis. Now, this includes, but is not limited to, food and livestock, water, plants, energy, health resources, transportation, and construction materials, and gives the government the ability to, quote, control the general distribution of any material, including applicable services, in the civilian market. Now, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney laughed off a question about the document at today's briefing. Let's take a look.
There's been some online commentary suggesting this gives the executive branch power to allocate energy, food, water in either peacetime or wartime. And there are some conservative blogs that are pushing the notion that this suggests the White House is preparing for a war with Iran. Can you explain what this executive order was?
Well, I cannot explain that reaction to it. I think it was a fairly standard and routine piece of business.
Now, not everybody's laughing about this executive order. In fact, some have suggested this would give the President of the United States the authority to declare basically martial law during times of peace. And to be sure, this is simply the latest string of actions taken by the administration that ignore the basic principles of our Constitution. Joining me now in tonight's edition of The Real Obama, Jay Sekulow from the American Center for Law and Justice, and Fox News contributor Lanny Davis. Guys, welcome back.
I'm laughing about it, Sean. How are you?
All right, good. Well, let's give a little history here. Jay, we'll start with you because this was actually signed, or similar National Defense Resources Preparedness by Bill Clinton. You have similar executive orders signed by Dwight Eisenhower, George W. Bush. But there's a difference. There are some things that changed in this that I think has brought, legitimate criticism and concern. Can you go through that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The idea of this act is nothing new. Presidents have had this since the 1950s. But what is different about this one, different than any of the other one, is the definition of national defense. It's incorporated what's called the Stafford Act. I don't want to get overly technical, but this gives the president much broader authority than any of the previous acts. In fact, and Lanny may remember this, the previous acts didn't give incorporation of the Stafford Act, which is a civilian civil situation where the president would have unlimited authority, subject, of course, to checks and balances. And we can't ignore checks and balances here. But the definition of national defense is broader than it has ever been under any of these previous executive orders. And I think that's the most significant aspect of this. And by the way, the president's getting flack from the left and the right. The left said this is preparation for the war in Iran. That's why the president's doing this, a potential war with Iran and the concern about the energy resources of our country. And, of course, conservatives are saying this is unchecked power. Yeah. There's a balance here, but the one thing that's very different, Sean, is the fact that the national defense definition is different than it has ever been and much broader than it's ever been.
Lenny, this very specific section, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, is 801J, if I recall.
J, right. That's correct.
Why would the president change that definition? And, Lanny, you're an expert in media. Nobody is as good as you. If you want to release something that you don't want people to find and you're in the White House, when do you release it? Late on a Friday afternoon, hoping nobody pays attention to it. Why would they release?
I used to release things at 10 o'clock on July 3rd. That was a really good
that's a good time. I got it.
Nice to hear you, Jay, being your scholarly self. And I want to compliment Sean Hannity for the first time in a long time of not being slanted and describing this as a bipartisan act that actually goes back to Franklin Roosevelt, Jay, and through Harry Truman, not just the 1950s.
But he changed it. But Lanny, we got to that part. You're wasting some valuable airtime. We got
you
that.
You don't like me complimenting you, Sean.
Nice.
The second point I want to make. The second point I want to make, aside from Sean Hannity being a good guy, is that this is really not a significant risk to America. I don't know why he made those changes, to answer your question, but there's no risk here because every president needs authority in times of emergency, such as a nuclear attack or something that is another 9/11, and this authority has been on the books, and President Obama won't misuse it. The real question is, why are the extremes on the left and the right so quick to jump beyond the facts and look at the worst possible interpretation, and it's almost lunacy if you look at some of these. Tell me.
Because of the way the president's acted, for example, we have a very specific process for recess appointments. And with the National Labor Board appointments of the president, remember, he didn't go through that process.
That's right.
Conservatives like myself, Jay, I think would argue that the health care mandate is not constitutional. The Cato Institute actually has the top 10 instances where the president has pretty much thumbed his nose at the Constitution. And so there is this suspicion, Jay. I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem here is context. It is a document dump in the sense that it comes in late on a Friday evening. That's an interesting situation. Second is the context of the other situations. You talk about the Attorney General and the Fast and Furious situation. Then the Attorney General said he was concerned about what the NYPD was doing, which was clearly within the law, and I think the Department of Justice has now backed off on that wisely. But you look at the context, and then the definitional aspect, and I think the definition is the problem. I don't believe, and I agree, that the president could get away with this because, number one, you've got a Congress, you've got an active media, that's why we're here tonight, but you've got to ask yourself, why this overly broad definition of national defense? Why incorporate the Stafford Act, which talks about foreign and national interests and tsunamis and situations which the president would have control over under normal source, but why do you have to expand it in the form of this executive order? That's the concern. Of course, executive orders have been challenged before in court.
Let me throw this to Lanny.
The thing here, I don't understand the national defense issue. That's the biggest thing.
And I think what this is, Woodrow Wilson progressives like yourself, Lanny, one of the things we conservatives have a problem is you guys believe in this concept that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and so you can ignore issues like checks and balances and separation of powers, like in the case of recess appointments. So I think we're looking at this differently, and that is that in this particular case, does it give a president pretty much impunity to do whatever they want? And why change the definition, considering the president has thumbed his nose at the Constitution in the past?
First of all, my point of view is he hasn't thumbed his nose, and if the Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional, let the Supreme Court decide that, not Jay